The rain fell in a relentless silver sheet, blurring the hard edges of the city into a watercolor of bleeding neon and slick black asphalt. Julian Croft stood under the grand marble portico of the Croft Tower, a monolith of steel and ambition that tore a hole in the Gotham-like sky. He was waiting for his car, an island of bespoke tailoring and quiet fury in a sea of scurrying, umbrella-wielding mortals. A charity gala had just ended, another hollow exercise in public relations where he'd smiled until his jaw ached and shaken hands he would immediately forget. He despised the pretense, the cloying scent of desperation and perfume. Suddenly, a small figure broke through the cordon of his security, a flash of pink in the monochrome evening. It was a little girl, no older than 6, her face streaked with tears and rain. Before his guards could intercept her, she skidded to a halt before him, her chest heaving with ragged sobs. She held up a photograph, its edges soft and frayed with time. "Please," she whispered, her voice a fragile bird in the storm. "Have you seen my daddy?" Julian's gaze dropped from her desperate, pleading eyes to the picture. His breath hitched. The world tilted on its axis. The man in the photo was younger, leaner, his face etched with a poverty and a guileless warmth Julian had never known. He was smiling, his arm around a woman with kind eyes. But it was him. The same sharp line of the jaw, the same unruly dark hair, the same small crescent-shaped scar above his left eyebrow. It was his face, staring back from a life he had never lived. The moment stretched, thin and taut, suspended in the space between raindrops. Julian's mind, a fortress of calculated decisions and ruthless logic, went utterly blank. His security team, a pair of imposing men named Harris and Grant, moved in, their movements fluid and apologetic. "I'm sorry, Mr. Croft," Harris murmured, placing a firm but gentle hand on the little girl's shoulder. "Come on, sweetheart. Let's find your mommy." The girl flinched but didn't retreat. Her gaze remained locked on Julian, an anchor of pure, unadulterated hope. "But he looks like him," she insisted, her small voice rising over the city's din. "The picture. It's him." A woman rushed forward then, breathless and frantic. She was young, maybe early 20s, with the same dark hair as the little girl and eyes that held a universe of exhaustion. She wore a thin, soaked jacket and clutched a worn-out tote bag to her chest. "Lily! Oh, thank God. I am so sorry, sir," she said, her words tumbling out in a rush as she scooped the crying child into her arms. She saw you on the news, and she got this idea in her head. We live just a few blocks away." She ran off. "I'm so sorry to have bothered you." The woman, who Julian assumed was the mother, tried to take the photograph, but the girl, Lily, clutched it tight in her small fist. Julian finally found his voice, a cold, hard thing that scraped his throat. "It's fine," he said. The word clipped. He wanted them gone. He wanted the impossible image erased from his mind. He gave a curt nod to Grant, who understood the silent command. Grant stepped forward, his presence alone a form of dismissal. "If you'll please come this way, ma'am, we can help you get a cab." The woman, Clara, as he would later learn her name was, looked mortified. She nodded, murmuring more apologies as she was ushered away, the little girl's tear-streaked face looking back at Julian over her shoulder until they were swallowed by the crowd and the rain. Julian stood frozen. The ghost of the photograph burned onto his retinas. His car, a sleek black Maybach, pulled silently to the curb, the door opened by a waiting driver. He got in, the scent of supple leather and sanitized air, a stark contrast to the raw, rain-soaked emotion of the encounter. As the car pulled away, he glanced back at the portico. They were gone, but the image remained, a ghost in his machine. His name was Julian Croft. He had no family, no past before 5 years ago, when he had emerged from the wreckage of a tragic fire that had claimed his parents, a fire that had left him with a fractured memory and an iron will to build an empire from their ashes. That was his story, the one he'd told the world, the one he'd told himself. It was a lie. And for the first time in 5 years, a crack had appeared in the foundation of that lie, threatening to bring the entire edifice of his life crashing down. The drive to his penthouse was a silent, tense affair. The city lights smeared across the tinted windows, a river of fractured colors that did nothing to distract him from the turmoil raging within. His mind, usually a well-oiled machine, was malfunctioning, replaying the scene in a relentless loop. The girl's desperate eyes, the woman's frantic apology, and the photograph. That impossible photograph. Who was the woman in the picture? Why did the man, a man who was undeniably him, look so happy? It was a simple, unburdened happiness, a feeling Julian only recognized in the abstract, like a word in a foreign language he had learned but never spoken. He arrived at his residence, a sterile palace of glass and steel perched atop the city, a place designed to insulate him from the very world he now felt crashing in. He bypassed the living area, with its panoramic views and museum-quality art, and went straight to his office. He poured a glass of scotch, the amber liquid doing little to warm the ice that had formed in his veins. He sat behind his vast obsidian desk and stared at his reflection in the dark screen of his computer. The face that stared back was his own, yet it felt alien. It was the face of Julian Croft, CEO, Billionaire, a man forged in a crucible of loss and ambition. But was it his only face? The fire. It was the genesis of his story. He remembered flames, the smell of smoke, a searing pain, and then nothing, a chasm of blackness. He'd woken up in a hospital weeks later, his identity pieced together from a wallet that had miraculously survived the blaze. The hospital staff had told him about the fire, about his parents. He'd had no reason to doubt them. The grief, or what he assumed was grief, had been a cold, hollow thing, quickly replaced by a singular burning focus. To rebuild, to create something so vast and powerful it would be impervious to fate. Croft Enterprises was not just a company. It was a fortress against the chaos that had stolen his past. He had never looked back. He'd never had a reason to, until now. His hand trembled slightly as he set the glass down. He pulled up a search engine and, after a moment's hesitation, typed in his own name. The results were a litany of his success. Articles in Forbes, profiles in the Wall Street Journal, interviews where he spoke of his tragic past, and unwavering focus on the future. It was all there, the carefully constructed narrative of his life. He then tried a different search, a wild, grasping in the dark kind of search. He typed in descriptions of the photo. Man with scar above left eye, woman with dark hair, construction worker. The results were a meaningless jumble of stock photos and news articles about workplace accidents. It was foolish, a dead end. Yet he couldn't shake the feeling, the deep, primal resonance of the image. It felt real, more real than the cold, sterile reality of his penthouse. He picked up his phone and dialed a number. It was answered on the first ring. Marcus. The voice on the other end was calm, professional. Marcus Thorne was his head of security, a former NYPD detective with a knack for finding people who didn't want to be found. He was the one man Julian trusted implicitly, not with his emotions, but with his problems. "There was an incident tonight, at the gala," Julian began, his voice low and controlled. "A woman and a child." "I was briefed by Harris and Grant, sir. The situation was handled." "I want you to find them," Julian said, the words feeling strange on his tongue. "The woman and the girl. Her name was Lily." There was a brief pause. "May I ask the purpose, sir? Are you planning to press charges for harassment?" "No," Julian said quickly. Too quickly. He cleared his throat, recalibrating his tone. "No, it's a personal matter. The girl showed me a photograph. I want to see it again. I want to know who they are, where they got it, and what they want." He left out the most crucial detail, that the man in the photograph was him. To admit that, even to Marcus, would be to give voice to a possibility so terrifying it threatened to shatter his very sense of self. Discreetly, Marcus, "I don't want a scene. I just want information." "Understood, sir. I'll get on it first thing in the morning." Julian hung up and stared out at the city. The rain had stopped, leaving the world slick and glistening under the artificial glow of a million lights. For the first time, his perch felt less like a throne and more like a cage. He was Julian Croft, the man who had everything. But a 6-year-old girl with a tattered photograph had just shown him that he might, in fact, have nothing at all. He might not even know who he was. The thought was a cold dread that seeped into his bones, a fear more profound than any market crash or hostile takeover. The fear of the unknown. The fear of the man in the photograph. Marcus Thorne was a man who moved through the city's underbelly like a ghost. He had a network of contacts, a quiet, unassuming demeanor, and an almost supernatural ability to read the stories etched into people's faces and the streets they walked. Finding the woman and the child was, for him, a trivial matter. A few calls, a quick check of security footage from the area around Croft Tower, and a cross-reference with local residency records. By noon the next day, he was standing outside a tenement building in a forgotten corner of the Bronx, a world away from Julian Croft's gilded cage. The building sagged, its brick facade stained with years of pollution and neglect. The air smelled of damp concrete and boiled cabbage. Marcus climbed 4 flights of stairs, the wooden steps groaning under his weight, until he reached apartment 4B. He knocked, a gentle, non-threatening rap of his knuckles against the peeling paint. The door opened a crack, held by a tarnished brass chain. A pair of wary, exhausted eyes peered out at him. It was the woman from the night before. "Yes?" Her voice was defensive. "My name is Marcus Thorne. I work for Mr. Croft." The name hung in the air between them, heavy and dangerous. The woman's eyes narrowed. "We're not interested in whatever you're selling, and we're not suing. It was a mistake. Please leave." "I'm not here to cause trouble, miss," Marcus said, his tone even and placating. "Mr. Croft was just intrigued by the photograph your daughter had. He'd like to know more about it. He's willing to compensate you for your time." The mention of money was a calculated risk. It could be seen as an insult or a lifeline. In this case, it was the latter. The chain slid back, and the door opened. The apartment was tiny, meticulously clean but threadbare. Every piece of furniture was worn, every surface scrubbed. The little girl, Lily was sitting on a patched sofa, drawing in a coloring book with a set of mismatched crayons. She looked up when Marcus entered, her eyes wide. The woman, who introduced herself as Clara Ramos, stood with her arms crossed, a fragile fortress guarding her small world. "Lily, go to your room for a minute, sweetie," she said gently. Lily looked from her aunt to Marcus, then gathered her crayons and disappeared into a room no bigger than a closet. "She's my niece, not my daughter," Clara clarified, her voice tight. "Her mother, my sister Elena, passed away a few years ago." Marcus nodded, filing the information away. He gestured towards the photograph, which was now sitting in a small, simple frame on a crowded end table. "The man in the picture," he began. "Lily called him her daddy." Clara's face softened, the defensiveness momentarily replaced by a deep, aching sadness. "That's Daniel," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Her father, my brother-in-law, he's missing." Marcus kept his expression neutral, but his detective's mind was racing. "Missing?" "It happened 5 years ago," Clara explained, her gaze distant, lost in a memory. "He was a construction worker, a good man. He loved Lily more than anything. There was an accident on a job site, a fall. He hit his head hard. He was in the hospital for a while, but he was never the same. He had amnesia. The doctor said it was post-traumatic. He couldn't remember anything. Not me, not Elena, not even Lily." The story tumbled out of her, a torrent of pain held back for too long. "One day, he just walked out of the apartment. We think he got confused. He left his wallet, his phone, everything. We searched for him, filed police reports, put up flyers, but he was just gone. It's like he vanished off the face of the earth." She finally looked at Marcus, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "When Lily saw Mr. Croft on TV, she just latched onto the resemblance. It's a silly, childish fantasy. I'm sorry we bothered him." Marcus looked at the photograph again. The man named Daniel, a construction worker with amnesia who disappeared 5 years ago. The timeline was a perfect, chilling match to the genesis of Julian Croft. "This accident," Marcus asked carefully, "do you remember where it was?" "A luxury condo development. Downtown," Clara said. "The Obsidian, they called it." Marcus's blood ran cold. The Obsidian. It was one of the first major projects Croft Enterprises had acquired and completed after Julian took over his supposed family's business, a project he had personally overseen in the early days. "Miss Ramos," Marcus said, his voice low, "I believe Mr. Croft would be very interested in hearing this story himself, and he'd want to see this." He pointed to a small wooden bird sitting next to the photograph, its form simple, but carved with an obvious love. "Daniel made that for her," Clara said softly. "He was always whittling." Marcus left the apartment with a copy of the missing persons report and a high-resolution scan of the photograph on his phone. He had a feeling that the problem he'd been sent to solve was about to become infinitely more complicated. He called Julian from his car. "I have the information," Marcus said, forgoing pleasantries. "The man in the photograph is named Daniel. Daniel Vargas. According to the woman, Clara Ramos, she's the girl's aunt, not her mother. He was a construction worker who suffered a severe head injury and subsequent amnesia 5 years ago. He disappeared shortly after." He paused, letting the words sink in. "The accident occurred at the Obsidian construction site." Silence. A long, heavy silence stretched down the phone line. Marcus could almost hear the gears turning in Julian's mind. the cold, hard logic battling against an encroaching, impossible truth. "That's not possible," Julian finally said, but the conviction in his voice was gone, replaced by a raw, ragged edge of something that sounded like fear. "And the girl?" "Her name is Lily. Daniel Vargas is her father." "I want to see everything," Julian commanded, his voice strained. "The police reports, the hospital records, everything you can find on this Daniel Vargas. And I want to know about the settlement from the accident." "There was no settlement," Marcus said quietly. "According to Clara, the company stonewalled them. Since Daniel disappeared before they could file a proper claim, and he was the only witness to the safety violation he claimed had happened, the case was dropped. They got nothing." The line went dead. Julian had hung up. In his penthouse, Julian stood before the floor-to-ceiling window, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. Amnesia. The word echoed in the vast, empty space of his mind. A convenient diagnosis for a man who wanted to forget. But he hadn't wanted to forget. He had been told there was nothing left to remember. He'd built his entire world on that premise. Daniel Vargas. The name meant nothing to him. A construction worker, a father. It was a life as alien to him as that of a man from another planet. And yet, there were flashes, whispers at the edge of his consciousness, the scent of sawdust, the feel of a small warm hand in his, the taste of cheap, strong coffee. These were not the memories of Julian Croft. They were fragments of another life, a life he had supposedly never lived. The information from Marcus arrived in a secured, encrypted file. Julian opened it, his heart hammering against his ribs. There it was, a driver's license photo of Daniel Vargas. It was his face, younger, unburdened, but undeniably his. Hospital records detailing a severe concussion, contusions, and a diagnosis of dissociative amnesia. A missing persons report filed by a frantic Clara Ramos. And then, the accident report from the Obsidian site. It was brief, sanitized. A worker, D. Vargas, had slipped and fallen. No witnesses, no faulty equipment. Case closed. Julian remembered the Obsidian project. He'd been ruthless, pushing timelines, cutting costs. Had he personally signed off on a report that buried the truth of a man's life? A man who might have been him? The thought was nauseating. He pushed away from his desk, a wave of vertigo washing over him. He walked to his bedroom, a minimalist expanse of gray and white, and opened a drawer in his bedside table. Beneath a stack of neatly folded handkerchiefs was a small velvet box. He opened it. Inside was the only thing he possessed from his life before the fire. A simple silver wedding band, slightly scratched. It had been on his finger when he woke up in the hospital. He'd taken it off, unable to bear the reminder of a wife he couldn't remember. He'd never put it on again. He looked at the ring, then back at the picture of Daniel Vargas on his screen. The man in the photo was wearing the exact same ring. It wasn't a coincidence, it was a confirmation. A death sentence for Julian Croft and a resurrection for a man he didn't know. He felt a rage building inside him, a hot, suffocating anger. At whom, he wasn't sure. At the world? At fate? At the man in the photograph for having a life so fragile it could be shattered by a simple fall? He swept his arm across his desk, sending a laptop, a lamp, and a stack of papers crashing to the floor. The sound echoed in the silent penthouse, a testament to his unraveling control. He was not Daniel Vargas. He was Julian Croft. He had built an empire. He had clawed his way to the top. He would not be undone by a ghost from a past that wasn't his. He would fight it. He would bury it. He spent the next few days in a self-imposed prison, a whirlwind of work and denial. He pushed his company harder, made more aggressive deals, demanded more from his employees. He was trying to outrun the ghost, to reinforce the walls of his identity with the bricks and mortar of his success. But the ghost was persistent. It haunted his dreams, visions of a little girl with his eyes, a woman with a kind smile, a life of simple, profound love that he had somehow lost. Marcus called him several times, but Julian ignored the calls. He didn't want more information. He wanted less. He wanted oblivion. But the universe, it seemed, had other plans. One evening, as he was leaving the office, a familiar figure was waiting for him in the lobby. It was Clara Ramos. She was standing by the security desk, looking small and out of place amidst the soaring marble and chrome. She wasn't angry. She wasn't demanding. She just looked sad. "Mr. Croft," she said, her voice steady, despite the tremor in her hands, "I'm not here for money. I know you think this is some kind of scam." She opened her tote bag and pulled out a worn, leather-bound journal. "These were Daniel's," she said, holding it out to him. "He wrote in it every day. About his work, about my sister, about Lily." Julian stared at the journal as if it were a venomous snake. He made no move to take it. "He wrote about you," Clara continued, her voice cracking. "He wrote about a dream he had, of building a house for his family with his own 2 hands. He described the grain of the wood he would use, the way the light would fall in the kitchen in the morning. He wasn't a rich man. He wasn't important. But he was a good man. And Lily deserves to know that. She deserves to know her father didn't just abandon her." She placed the journal on the security desk between them. "I thought, maybe if you read it, you'd understand." She then pulled out the small, carved wooden bird. "And he made this. His hands made this." She set it next to the journal. "The man who made this for his daughter wouldn't just leave her." With that, she turned and walked away, leaving Julian alone in the cavernous lobby with the relics of a life he refused to claim. He stood there for a long time, the security guards watching him with a mixture of curiosity and concern. Finally, with a sense of grim inevitability, he picked up the journal and the wooden bird. He took them home. For hours he sat in his silent office, the journal unopened on his desk, the small bird in his hand. He ran his thumb over the smooth, worn wood. It felt right, familiar, as if his own hands remembered the act of carving it. With a deep, shuddering breath, he opened the journal. The handwriting was a rough, masculine scrawl, the ink slightly faded. The first entry was dated 6 years ago. October 12th. Got the job at the Obsidian site today. It's a big one. The money will be good. Elena's worried. Says those downtown sites are dangerous. I told her I'd be careful. I'm always careful. For her. For the baby. Julian's hand tightened on the journal. Elena. The name of his wife. The baby. Lily. He read on, his carefully constructed world dissolving with every word. He read about Daniel's hopes and fears, his simple joys and quiet frustrations. He read about the day Lily was born, the overwhelming, terrifying love Daniel had felt the first time he held her. He read about Elena's sickness, a brief, brutal battle with cancer that had taken her just a year later, leaving Daniel a broken but determined single father, held together by the love of his daughter and the support of his sister-in-law, Clara. He read about Daniel's growing concerns over safety at the Obsidian site. his arguments with a foreman who was cutting corners to meet deadlines. May 3rd. Another close call today. Rebar wasn't secured properly. Told the foreman, a guy named Miller. He just blew me off. Said the big boss, Croft, is pushing for an early finish. All he cares about is his bottom line. Doesn't care about the little guys who are actually building his damn tower. Julian felt a fresh wave of nausea. He remembered Miller. He remembered pushing him, threatening his job if the project fell behind schedule. He had created the very conditions that had led to the accident. The last entry was dated the day before the fall. May 8th. Lily said my name today, clear as a bell. Daddy. My heart just about exploded. I swear, I'd take on the whole world for that little girl. I'm going to talk to the union rep tomorrow about the site. This can't go on. It's not safe. I have to make sure I come home to her every night. She's all I've got left. Julian closed the journal. The silence in the room was deafening. There was no more room for doubt. No more space for denial. He was Daniel Vargas. He had a daughter. And he had left her. He hadn't meant to, but he had. In his quest to become Julian Croft, he had erased Daniel Vargas, and, with him, his own child. The grief was a physical thing, a crushing weight on his chest. It was not the hollow, abstract grief he had felt for the parents he couldn't remember. This was a raw, tearing agony for the daughter he had forgotten, for the man he had been, a man who, despite his poverty, had possessed a richness of heart that Julian Croft could never comprehend. He picked up the phone and called Marcus. His voice was hoarse, broken. Marcus, I need you to arrange something for me. I need to go to the Bronx. I need to see my daughter. The next day, Marcus drove him. Julian didn't wear his usual bespoke suit. He wore simple jeans and a plain, dark sweater, an attempt to shed the skin of Julian Croft. But the transformation was more than just clothes. The hard, impenetrable mask he had worn for 5 years had shattered, leaving behind a man who looked lost, vulnerable, and profoundly sad. They parked a block away from Clara's apartment building. "Are you sure about this, sir?" Marcus asked, his voice laced with concern. Julian nodded, unable to speak. He got out of the car and walked towards the building, each step feeling heavier than the last. He was walking back into a life he had fled, a life he had never known he'd lost. The smell of the neighborhood, a mix of exhaust fumes, street food, and dampness, was both alien and achingly familiar. He saw a small park at the end of the block, a patch of green with a rusty swing set, and a faded hopscotch court. And there, sitting on one of the swings being pushed by Clara, was Lily. She was laughing, her small legs kicking with joy, her face tilted up towards the sky. The sound of her laughter, a pure, tinkling melody, pierced Julian's heart. It was the most beautiful sound he had ever heard. He stopped, hidden behind a large oak tree, and just watched. He watched his daughter play. He watched Clara, the woman who had held his family together with sheer grit and love, smile at the niece she was raising as her own. He saw the bond between them, the small, intimate world they had built in his absence. And he knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that he was a stranger to that world. He was an intruder, a ghost. He had no right to be there, to disrupt their hard-won peace with his catastrophic return. What could he possibly offer them? Money? A sterile mansion? A father who didn't know how to be one? He had forgotten how to love, how to connect, how to be anything other than the ruthless machine he had become. The weight of his failure of his 5 lost years was suffocating. He turned, his shoulders slumped in defeat, and began to walk back to the car. He couldn't do it. He couldn't face them. He couldn't destroy their lives a second time. "Daddy?" The voice was small, tentative. It stopped him in his tracks. He turned around slowly. Lily had gotten off the swing and was standing a few feet away, her head tilted, her brow furrowed in confusion. She was looking right at him. Clara was frozen by the swing set, her hand over her mouth, her eyes wide with a mixture of hope and terror. Julian's heart stopped. He looked at his daughter, his beautiful, brave little girl, and saw a flicker of recognition in her eyes. Not of Julian Croft, the billionaire on the news, but of the man in the photograph, of her father. The dam of his carefully controlled emotions finally broke. A single tear traced a path down his cheek, the first he had shed in 5 years. He didn't know what to say. The words, "I'm sorry," felt impossibly small, an insult to the chasm of time and pain that separated them. So he did the only thing he could think of. He knelt slowly so as not to frighten her, bringing himself down to her level. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the small wooden bird. He held it out to her on the palm of his hand. Lily's eyes widened. She took a hesitant step forward, then another. She looked from the bird to his face, her gaze searching, questioning. She reached out a small, trembling hand and gently took the bird from him. She clutched it to her chest, her eyes filling with tears. "You came back," she whispered, her voice choked with an emotion too big for her small body. And in that moment, Julian Croft died, and Daniel Vargas, a father who had lost his way, finally began the long, painful journey home. The reunion was not a storybook ending. It was a messy, complicated, and tear-filled beginning. Clara rushed over, her face a storm of conflicting emotions. She knelt beside Julian, her hand hovering over Lily's back, protective and uncertain. "Daniel?" she whispered, the name a question, a prayer. Julian looked at her, at the woman who had carried the weight of his absence for so long, and the guilt was a physical blow. "Clara," he said, his voice raw, I remember. Not everything. It's broken, but I remember." He remembered her kindness, her strength. He remembered her sitting by Elena's bedside, holding her hand. He remembered her promising his dying wife that she would always look after him and Lily. A promise she had kept, while he had forgotten. He looked back at Lily, who was still clutching the bird, her eyes darting between the two adults, trying to make sense of the tidal wave of emotion that had just crashed into her small life. "I got lost," he said to her, the simplest explanation for an impossibly complex truth. "I got hurt, and I couldn't find my way back. I'm so sorry, Lilybug." The nickname slipped out, a relic from a forgotten memory, unearthed by the sight of her face. Lily's lower lip trembled, and she launched herself into his arms, burying her face in his shoulder, her small body shaking with sobs. Julian wrapped his arms around her, holding his daughter for the first time in 5 years. It felt like coming home. It felt like dying and being born all at once. The smell of her hair, the feeling of her small, warm body against his. It was a sensory memory so powerful, it brought a fresh wave of tears to his eyes. He held on tight, as if she were an anchor in the storm of his fractured mind, the only thing that was real. The next few weeks were a delicate, painful dance of rediscovery. Julian, or Daniel, as he was slowly, tentatively, beginning to think of himself, did not try to uproot Lily and Clara from their lives. He knew that showing up with the trappings of his wealth would only frighten and alienate them further. Instead, he came to them. Marcus would drive him to the Bronx every day, and he would spend hours just being there. He sat on the floor of their small apartment and helped Lily with her coloring books. He listened as Clara told him stories of the past 5 years, filling in the vast, empty spaces in his memory. She told him about Lily's first day of school, the time she lost her first tooth, her fear of thunderstorms. Each story was a gift, and each one a knife to his heart, a reminder of all he had missed. The memories came back in fits and starts, triggered by the most mundane things. The taste of the coffee Clara made, strong and sweet, the way he, Daniel, had always liked it. The scent of the lavender-scented soap in their bathroom. A song on the radio that he somehow knew all the words to. Each fragment was a piece of a puzzle he was desperately trying to solve, the puzzle of himself. He learned about Daniel Vargas, the man he had been. He was simple, kind, and fiercely loyal. He loved to work with his hands, to build and fix things. He was a man who found joy not in acquisition, but in creation. A man who had loved his wife with a quiet, steady devotion, and adored his daughter with every fiber of his being. He was, in every way that mattered, the opposite of Julian Croft. Reconciling the two identities was a form of psychological torture. In his penthouse at night, he was Julian, the titan of industry, surrounded by a cold, sterile luxury that now felt like a prison. He would look at the complex financial reports and strategic plans on his desk, and they would feel utterly meaningless. The skills, the ambition, the ruthless drive that had built his empire now seemed like a grotesque mutation, a defense mechanism born of trauma. During the day, in the Bronx, he was Daniel, a ghost trying to learn how to be solid again. He was clumsy, hesitant. He didn't know Lily's favorite food or what cartoons she liked to watch. He had to relearn the rhythm of being a father, a rhythm he had once known by heart. There were difficult moments. One afternoon, Lily fell and scraped her knee in the park. Her first instinct was to run to Clara, not to him. The look of rejection on his face was so profound that Clara had to pull him aside later. "It's going to take time, Daniel," she said gently. "You're still a stranger to her in many ways. You have to earn her trust back." The words stung, but he knew they were true. He had to prove he wasn't going to disappear again. One of the hardest things was dealing with Croft Enterprises. He couldn't just walk away from the empire he had built. It was a complex machine with thousands of employees and billions of dollars at stake. His board of directors, who knew him only as the cold, calculating Julian Croft, would never understand. He began to delegate more, trusting his executive team to handle the day-to-day operations. He started to look at his company not as a monument to his own ambition, but as a tool, a resource. He remembered Daniel's journal entry about the unsafe working conditions at the Obsidian. He launched a massive company-wide review of all safety protocols on his construction sites, pouring millions into new equipment and training. He fired the foreman, Miller, and started a foundation to support the families of workers injured on the job. Its first beneficiary was Clara Ramos, who received a settlement that was 5 years late, but substantial enough to ensure she would never have to worry about money again. She was hesitant to accept it, but he insisted. "It's not from Julian Croft," he told her. "It's from Daniel Vargas. It's what he would have done." He also began the slow, arduous process of legally untangling his two identities. Lawyers were brought in, sworn to secrecy. It was a logistical and legal nightmare. But for the first time in his life, he was fighting for something other than power or profit. He was fighting for his own soul. As the weeks turned into months, a new routine began to form. He bought a modest, comfortable house in a quiet, tree-lined neighborhood in Queens, a place with a backyard where Lily could play. It was a home, not a showcase. He, Clara, and Lily moved in together, a strange, cobbled-together family, bound by loss and a fragile, burgeoning hope. He spent his days with them. He learned to make pancakes, Lily's favorite breakfast. He learned how to braid her hair, his large, clumsy fingers fumbling with the fine strands. He took her to the zoo, the museum, the library. He read her bedtime stories every night. His voice, once used to command boardrooms, now softened to a gentle murmur. He was not just reclaiming his past, he was building a future. One evening, as he was tucking Lily into bed, she looked up at him with her serious, old-soul eyes. "Are you going to get lost again?" she asked, her voice small. The question was a punch to the gut. He sat on the edge of her bed and took her small hand in his. "No, Lilybug," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm never getting lost again. I found my way home. You are my home." She seemed to accept this, snuggling down into her pillows. As he was about to leave, she said one more thing. "I'm glad you came back, Daddy." He closed the door to her room, his heart a painful, beautiful ache in his chest. He was Daniel. He was a father. He was home. The journey was far from over. There were still gaps in his memory, still moments when the cold shadow of Julian Croft would creep into his thoughts. But now he had a reason to fight the darkness. He had a reason to be better. He had his daughter. Later that night, he was in the small workshop he had built in the garage, a place filled with the scent of sawdust and varnish. He was whittling, his hands rediscovering a long-forgotten skill. He was carving a small, wooden dog for Lily. Clara came in, holding 2 mugs of tea. She handed one to him and watched him work for a moment. "You know," she said softly, "Elena always said you had magic in your hands, that you could create beautiful things out of nothing." He stopped carving and looked down at his hands. They were the hands of a billionaire, hands that had signed billion-dollar deals and crushed competitors. But they were also the hands of a construction worker, calloused and strong, the hands of a father who carved toys for his daughter. "I'm not him, Clara," he said, the confession a painful whisper. "Not really. That man, Daniel, he was better than me." Clara reached out and placed her hand over his. Her touch was warm, grounding. "That man is still in there," she said, her voice firm. "He just got lost. And Julian Croft, maybe he was just the armor Daniel needed to survive until he could find his way back." He looked at her tired but resilient face, and saw not just a sister-in-law, but a friend, the one person who had seen both sides of him and had not run away. "Thank you, Clara," he said, his voice filled with a gratitude so immense it left no room for other words. "For everything." "Welcome home, Daniel," she replied, her smile small but genuine. He picked up the piece of wood and his knife. He still had a long way to go. He had to merge 2 lives, to heal the wounds of the past, and to become the father his daughter deserved. It was the hardest thing he had ever had to do. But as he began to carve again, shaping the rough piece of wood into something filled with love, he knew, for the first time in a long, long time, that he was exactly where he was supposed to be. Life settled into a new, precious rhythm. Mornings were a chaotic symphony of breakfast, school preparations, and Lily's endless, wonderful chatter. Daniel, as everyone now called him, found a deep, grounding satisfaction in these simple domestic rituals. Making Lily's lunch, walking her to the school bus, the quick, tight hug she gave him before she climbed aboard. These were the moments that stitched his fragmented soul back together. He continued to oversee his company, but his approach was transformed. He would take conference calls from the workshop in his garage, the scent of cedarwood a constant reminder of what was real. He shocked his board by implementing a comprehensive employee wellness program, profit-sharing initiatives, and generous family leave policies. A company is not a balance sheet, he announced at a tense shareholder meeting. It is a community, and a community that doesn't care for its weakest members is doomed to fail. Some of the old guard grumbled, calling him soft, but the shift in the company culture was palpable. Productivity and morale soared. Julian Croft, the shark, was gone. In his place was Daniel Vargas, the builder. He was building something more than skyscrapers now. He was building a legacy of compassion. He never fully recovered all of his memories. They remained like a shattered mirror, with large pieces missing and others reflecting a distorted version of the past. But he learned to live with the gaps. He had Clara to fill in the blanks, to share anecdotes of the man he used to be. And he had Lily, who was not a memory, but a vibrant, living, breathing present. She was his true north. One crisp autumn afternoon, he was in the backyard with Lily, raking the fallen leaves into a massive pile. Lily, squealing with delight, would run and jump into the pile, scattering the leaves everywhere, forcing him to start all over again. It was a pointless, wonderful game. Clara sat on the porch steps watching them, a warm, contented smile on her face. During a pause in the leaf piling, Lily grew quiet. She walked over to him, a thoughtful expression on her face. "Daddy," she said, "do you remember Mommy?" The question was so direct, so innocent, it knocked the wind out of him. He sat down on the grass and pulled her into his lap. "I don't remember her face as well as I should," he admitted, his voice soft. "Sometimes I see her in my dreams, but I remember how much I loved her. And I remember how much she loved you. She thought you were the most perfect thing in the entire world." "Clara says I have her smile," Lily said, her small finger tracing the line of her own mouth. "You do," Daniel said, his heart swelling. "You have her smile, and you have her kindness." He looked over at Clara, who gave him a small, encouraging nod. He knew he had to keep Elena's memory alive for Lily, even if that memory was a second-hand story for him. That evening he pulled out an old photo album Clara had kept. They sat on the sofa together, the three of them, and turned the pages. There was Daniel and Elena on their wedding day, young and impossibly happy. There was Elena, pregnant with Lily, her face glowing. And there were dozens of pictures of him, Daniel, holding his infant daughter, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated love. Seeing the images no longer felt like looking at a stranger. It felt like looking at a younger, more innocent version of himself. He could feel the echo of that man's emotions, the phantom limb of a love that had been amputated by trauma. He was beginning to integrate, to accept that he was both the man in the photographs and the man he was today. The past was not a life he had lost, but a foundation upon which he could build a new one. He eventually found a way to tell his story to the world, not as a sensational headline, but as a quiet testament to the resilience of the human spirit. In a carefully worded statement released through his foundation, he spoke of a tragic accident, a long struggle with amnesia, and the profound healing power of family. He asked for privacy, not for himself, but for his daughter. The world, surprisingly, granted it. His story became not a scandal, but an inspiration, a reminder that it is never too late to find your way home. A year after he walked back into Lily's life, they stood in that same park in the Bronx. He had refurbished it, using his own money and resources. There was a new, safe playground, freshly planted trees, and a small community garden. It was a place of joy and life. Lily was on the swings, flying high, her laughter echoing in the clear afternoon air. Clara was tending to a patch of tomato plants, her face relaxed and happy. She was taking college courses online, studying to be a social worker, her dream finally within reach. Daniel stood under the large oak tree, the same one he had hidden behind a lifetime ago. He was no longer hiding. He was present. He was whole. He was not just Julian Croft or Daniel Vargas. He was both. A man who had walked through the fire of loss and emerged, scarred but not broken, into the light of a second chance. He had everything he had ever wanted, and it had nothing to do with the money in his bank account or the tower that bore his name. It was in the sound of his daughter's laughter. It was in the quiet companionship of a woman who had become his family. It was in the simple, profound, and miraculous gift of being home. The story of a lost father and the daughter who found him is a powerful reminder that our identities are not fixed in stone. They are shaped by love, loss, and the choices we make every day. Who we are is not just about where we come from, but about who we choose to become. Have you ever felt lost, only to be found by an unexpected connection? Share your story, reach out to a loved one, or simply take a moment to appreciate the people who make you who you are. The most valuable treasures in life are not the things we own, but the bonds we share.